Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and I'm continuing the Overland Campaign with the Battle of North Anna, following the stalemate that ended the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse resulted in over 30,000 casualties, but by the end, Ulysses S. Grant hadn't been able to destroy Robert E. Lee's army. During the last phase of the battle, Grant had sent Winfield Scott Hancock and his Second Corps away from the battlefield in an attempt to draw Lee away from his entrenchments around the courthouse and to attack Hancock. Grant planned for his other three corps to hit Lee out in the open if Lee went for the bait. Lee got word about Hancock's movement and did move Richard Ewell's Second Corps a few miles to the southeast, but hadn't gone after Hancock. Grant now decided to push south by moving Governor K. Warren's Fifth Corps in the same direction of Hancock. By this point, Lee could see that Grant was making a wide swing in an attempt to get to Richmond. However, there was a problem. Two Union corps still faced Lee on the Spotsylvania battlefield. If Lee attempted to move south, Grant could attack his spread-out army. Lee could breathe a little easy because Richmond sent some forces north. Troops under John C. Breckinridge, fresh off their victory at the Battle of Newmarket in the Shenandoah Valley, as well as George Pickett's division, guarded the way across the North Anna River near Hanover Station. Now, Grant worried that with his army spread out, Lee could defeat him in detail. He would later write that Lee would never again have such an opportunity of dealing a heavy blow. By the afternoon of May 21st, Lee knew that the entire Union Army was on the move. Burnside's Ninth Corps marched south, but they encountered Ewell's Corps. Not wanting to bring on a general engagement while the army was spread out, and unsure about the strength of the enemy in his front, Burnside countermarched back toward Spotsylvania Courthouse. Lee instructed Richard Anderson, temporarily commanding James Longstreet's corps, to march at 7 p.m. down the Telegraph Road with Ewell's Corps in front on their way to North Anna. A.P. Hill's corps left at 10 p.m. and swung farther to the west. The exhausted troops traveled through the night in an attempt to get beyond Grant's reach and to buy time for Lee to judge Grant's true intentions. By 8 a.m. on the morning of May 22nd, Lee crossed the North Anna. He had won the race. Grant and the Army of the Potomac commander George Meade discussed their next steps in the campaign. Grant had two options. He could swing to the east or west and force Lee to give up his defensive positions south of the river, or he could head straight for Lee. Meade, tired of the bloodshed, wanted to try the flanking maneuver, but Grant chose to adhere to his original plan that stated, "Lee's army will be your objective point. Wherever Lee goes, you will go." By the end of the day on May 22nd, the entire Union Army was on their way to the North Anna. Problems arose throughout Grant and Meade's army as they marched south. The maps that the corps commanders used were substandard, not including important locations, and the locations that were on the maps were in the wrong places. Grant passed down the orders for the army to begin marching toward Lee at 5 a.m. The early morning didn't relieve the hot summer heat. Warren and his Fifth Corps ran into problems when he was ordered to cross at Jericho Bridge. He didn't see a Jericho Bridge on his map, but there was a Jericho Mills. He would find out that there was instead a ford at Jericho Mills. Warren and his aides enlisted the help of an elderly African-American man to find the ford, but he confessed that he hadn't been to it in about 50 years. By the evening of May 23rd, Grant's forces were closing in on Lee. Lee himself hadn't fortified his position yet because he feared that Grant may swing to the west or east to flank him out of his position. But the Confederate general would soon get confirmation that Grant was heading straight for him. The bloodshed over the past couple of weeks had yet to dampen the spirits of the Confederate rank and file. One soldier wrote, "I believe this campaign to be the decisive one, and know we are going to whip the detestable enemy." Another wrote, "If Grant still desires to fight, he can be accommodated, and I think with the same results as before." At the North Anna, Lee placed Anderson's corps in the center, Hill's corps on the left, and Ewell's corps on the right. Anderson, as he crossed the Chesterfield Bridge, placed John Hennigan's brigade of South Carolinians at a redoubt that guarded the bridge, then marched the rest of the corps across. Warren's Fifth Corps was already crossing at the ford at Jericho Mills. Lee enlisted the help of Jedediah Hotchkiss, Stonewall Jackson's mapmaker for the Shenandoah Valley campaign, to help position his army to best take advantage of the ground on the south side of the river. Hotchkiss suggested not fortifying the location because the ground on the north side of the river was higher, which would subject the men to horrible artillery fire if they entrenched. Hancock and the Second Corps approached the redoubt guarded by the South Carolinians. A 100-yard open field was in front of the fortification, which the Southerners knew would allow them to rain lead into the advancing troops when the attacks began. A soldier in Hennigan's brigade recalled the scene years later. Here we hoped the enemy would attack us. On the south side of this river, on the road leading to Hanover Station, good heavy works had been completed, while a fort of inferior proportions on the north side was intended to protect the bridge across the river from raiding parties of the enemy. To our surprise, when the part of our army that was designed to cross the river at this point had crossed over, the 3rd Regiment, James Battalion, and the 7th Regiment were left behind about this fort. We had no idea that anything serious was intended, but after a while it leaked out that General Lee needed some time to complete a line of works from one point of the river to another on the same stream, on the south side, and that it would be intended that the bare handful of men with us were intended to hold the approach to the bridge in face of the tens of thousands of Grant's army in our front. Trying to realize the task assigned us, positions were assigned the different forces with us. It was seen that the 7th Regiment, which stretched to the left of the fort, could not occupy, even by a thin line, the territory near them. We were promised the cooperation of artillery just on the other side of the river. Hancock positioned 12 artillery batteries to assist his infantry in destroying the lone Confederate brigade. Brigadier General David Birney's division was chosen to attack the redoubt. Birney's 3,000 men from Thomas Egan, Byron Pierce, and William Brewster's brigades readied themselves for the assault. Egan's troops were split, with part of them attacking down the Telegraph Road, while the others were on the extreme left flank. A mixture of Pierce and Brewster's men occupied the right, with the rest of Brewster's brigade in reserve. When the 12 batteries opened fire on the South Carolinians, it shook the ground, making the Southerners dive for cover, and also neutralized a lot of the Confederate artillery on the south side of the river. Birney attacked at 6:30 p.m. The Confederate skirmishers out front fired only a few shots before being thrown back by the approaching Federals. A member of the 124th New York remembered, "One of the most savage fires of shell and bullets I have ever experienced, but the men only rushed on all the faster. We were only a few moments crossing the flats, but left strewn along our route nearly 1/5 of the charging line." The 7th, South Carolina, broke first, with some running for the bridge and others running into the river to escape the Union bullets. With their flank gone, the rest of Hennigan's men headed for the rear. A soldier in the brigade remembered, "It was manifest now that the enemy would soon be in our rear, and as the sun was sinking to rest in the west, we made a bold dash to cross the river in our rear, bringing down upon us the enemy's artillery fire of shot and shell as well as musketry. It looked hard to tell which way across the river was best, whether by way of the bridge or to wade across. It was said our lieutenant colonel, who was on foot when reaching the opposite bank and finding his boots full of water, said to a soldier, 'Tom, give me your hand.' 'No, no, Major,' was the reply. 'This is no time for giving hands.' The ascent of the long hill on the south side was made under heavy fire of the enemy. When at its height, a stuttering soldier proposed to a comrade to lay down and let him get behind him. Of course, the proposition was declined without thanks. When we reformed at the top of the hill, there was quite a fun of jokes told. Amongst others, the one last stated, Tom Paysinger, said, 'Nelson, if I had been there, I would have killed myself laughing,' whereupon the stutterer said, 'Tom Paysinger, I saw a heap of men down there, but not one that laughed.' War has its humorous as well as its serious side, and many a joke was cracked in battle, or if not mentioned then, the joke was told soon afterwards. It is recalled just here that in this battle an officer, who had escaped being wounded up to that time, was painfully wounded. When being borne on the way to the rear on a stretcher, he was heard to exclaim, 'Oh, that I had been a good man! Oh, that I had listened to my mother!' When he returned to the army, many a laugh was had at his expense when these expressions would be reported. But the officer got even with one of his tormentors, who was one of the bearers of the litter upon which the officer was borne away, for while this young man was at his best in imitating the words and tone of the wounded man, he was suddenly arrested by the words, 'Yes, I remember when a shell burst pretty close, you forgot me, and dropped your into the litter.' The laugh was turned. All this, however, was in perfect good humor. With Hennigan's brigade now pushed over the river, Hancock's Second Corps troops began moving across. Now, Lee would need to contend with two Union corps across the North Anna, Hancock, and Warren on the far left.